So hello and welcome to today's webinar, Tapping into Maple, presented by Michelle Bersaw-Robblee of UNH Cooperative Extension. Michelle is an assistant field specialist with 4-H youth development. My name is Stacy Perslow from the New Hampshire Farm to School program and the New Hampshire School and Youth Garden Network. Today's webinar is being recorded and eventually will be available on the New Hampshire Farm to School website. So if you could keep yourself muted for the presentation, questions or comments can be typed into the chat, and I'll be monitoring that, and we'll be communicating with Michelle during the presentation to try to get those answered during the presentation. But again, if you'd all like to introduce yourselves in the chat, please put your name, state, or school or other affiliation. Thanks, and I'm going to hand it over to Michelle.
Thanks, Stacy. So it's been great to see the breadth and depth of experience that is here tonight or this afternoon in the chat, and also where everybody's from. I didn't necessarily expect outside of the New England area, so that's exciting. Welcome. And I think that important as we go through this today, my goal with this is not to get into all of the weeds and stuff, but to really to think about how we can incorporate this into the different learning environments that everybody has. And so I really want to make this relevant to you. And I think important to know that everybody has a little bit different experience, and there's certainly some of you on that have probably a lot of experience and stuff to offer to the others in the group. And please feel free to share some of that with us as we're talking and going through some things. Okay, I'm not the necessarily be all expert, and I think that's the great thing about sugaring. There's I don't think there's a sugarer that probably hasn't burnt a batch of syrup in their life or has some experience, and then we can learn from that from each other, which is a wonderful part about it. And I will also let you know, I will give you my best tonight. I am battling a little bit of a cold, so I'm going to try to speak as clearly as I can and not cough or hack through this or anything. But I apologize in advance for any of that. So as Stacy said, Michelle Bersaw-Robblee, I'm a field specialist here in New Hampshire working in the 4-H program. I've been with the program now for 10 years. And working specifically as a field specialist for 5 years and working in agri-science programming. And maple, I just love. I'll tell you a little bit about that. Just a quick overview for those of you who are not familiar with extension. I wasn't sure who exactly was on tonight and what your familiarity would be with extension. But extension is really that outreach piece from the land grant university here in New Hampshire. That's UNH, and 4-H is that youth outreach piece of that. And we are working with youth through a network of volunteers in a variety of areas. Civic engagement and leadership, healthy living, and science kind of cover the broad topic areas, but there's a ton of projects within under those for that. And working with we start a Cloverbud program here, and this can be different in the state that you're in, but we're a 5 to 18-year-old program. So 5 to 7-year-olds are our Cloverbuds, and 8 to 18s are our general members. So a kind of a broad range there. Goals, kind of where I'm heading with this and what you can kind of expect. Hopefully providing a little bit of a useful framework for implementing maple sugaring into what your learning environment is. So for each of you, that might be a little bit different. So it seems like some of you may be with an actual school, or whether it be a charter school, homeschool, or traditional public school, but also parks and recs out there. So whatever that learning environment is for you, or if it's a 4-H club, you might wear other hats too. You certainly could wear other hats and be volunteers in other sectors and stuff too. So thinking about what those learning environments are for you and how this might fit into that. Overview of the resources available. So recognizing that a lot of the resources I'll be talking about some of them are here physically in New Hampshire, but available also online. So even though Leslie, you're out in Indiana, there's something that you can access out there. And you may have resources too that you utilize in your area that we might not know about, that you might want to share with us too. So hopefully we can make that a give and take. And then that my last point is really making this presentation meaningful for you. So for what I really want around that is if there's something that you want to know or you're really interested in, or it doesn't make sense to you, please, please, please let me know. I don't want you to leave tonight not knowing. You may leave not knowing, but we'll at least have a way to connect with each other to get you the answer or whatever it is that you need. Okay. So that's kind of my goals and where we're hopefully where we're headed for tonight. Makes sense? So I had a little bit of challenge when I started to put this little presentation together, because I immediately went to like, oh, well, we could talk about sub-biology stuff. Well, I can't not necessarily talk about the activities that are due, but really talking about that larger kind of 50,000 foot view. And, recognizing that some people are coming to this not even having any maple sugaring experience, and where the heck do you start with this? And, what are the things I should be thinking about? And how do I do this with youth? Which is really kind of that lens to always be thinking about. So I put up some questions and some things and thinking about when I am working with my volunteers to do this in either their club, an after school program, and I also have been doing it as a school enrichment. It's a classroom enrichment right in the classrooms with teachers side by side with them. And where we start looking at the goals of the activity, and I put this up there and it seems like maybe it's a no-brainer, thinking about where we want to head with this, but I think it's really important to think about before you head there. And I say that because there's so many variations on this project or lenses that you can look at maple sugaring to be the lens to accomplish that understanding what your goal is. Is it just to make maple syrup? Is it just to figure out that process? Or is it to really understand forest ecology and how everything in the environment in that forest lives together in harmony, and how that comes together to make this wonderful product for us? Is it to, in general, connect your youth to the outside and to have them have a connection with nature? So really being clear about what your goals are with the project. And I invite you to bring your youth into helping you formalize those goals. What are they interested about learning, and what do they want to get out of the project? And then I think it's important to know what the resources are available to you, thinking about that. And so I do have a slide on that. As far as here, some of the resources, it's not all, it's not extensive, and there are certainly others. And some of you may have resources that you would want to share too, but kind of some things that you can think about that are available to help you along the way, because maple sugaring can be, it's got some equipment with it, also as well as the knowledge piece too. So it can be a resource-rich project area, but not so insurmountable. And then I think it's important to think about what time you're willing or able to dedicate and allow for the project. And I say that having worked with a couple of different schools and a couple of different out of school programs, and knowing, and I think that really goes back to your goals for the activity too. And if you're really looking to make maple syrup, that is a time intensive process. There's no quick shortcut to it necessarily. So that you need to be willing to do that. And we'll talk a little bit about this, that you're a little bit at the mercy of the weather that you're experiencing. And so the season, we don't get to dictate the season is dictated to us. And you need to be able to hopefully have some flexibility and flow with that. So those are some things that kind of think about to even before you get started, and that mindset for yourself. So I start off resources. I do have this slide in again too, so don't worry about it. And I can certainly, Stacey, I think we can send this out to everybody afterwards so you can have it, because I also have the links built in here. But for those, and I went kind of more localized resources, there are certainly more resources around. But knowing your resources to get you started. So UNX Extension and 4-H is certainly a resource. I'm here tonight to tell you that. And from the side of curriculum, knowing curriculum, having curriculum, not the picture down here, the follow the path is a forestry curriculum that 4-H actually has. And so it's not necessarily just maple sugaring, but we're really talking about these trees and this forest, the ecology up there that's happening. And so we'll talk a little bit about extending and interdisciplinary areas that we can look into for this. So curriculum, but also technical support and ideas for extension. So I want you to know that this conversation between us tonight starts tonight, but it doesn't end tonight. I'm here, I'm available. I'm not planning to go anywhere from extension anytime soon. So even, if you don't implement it this year in this season and you're 2 seasons out and you want to have a question, I still plan to be here. So you can give me a call. And I will be here to help you. And if I don't know the answer, certainly to connect you with someone who does know that answer. New Hampshire Ag in the Classroom, New Hampshire Ag in the Classroom in particular, I say because they were key and instrumental in developing tapping into the maple tradition, which is their website is a tremendous resource for you as far as having lesson plans, especially if you're in, that formalized school setting, with the lesson plans that are lined up to your next generation science standards, ready to go as far as that piece for you, and broken out by grade levels. So if you're looking to connect content in that way, have done that work for you. Additional companion resources, some great videos, posters available there. So some of those resources, they also offer an equipment grant. This year's just wrapped up, so wouldn't be available for this year, but for next season can get in on that. The basic equipment grant to get started is like 10 buckets, lids, taps, hydrometers, filters, like the basics to get you going, to be able to boil out syrup. And then they also offer a second package when you kind of a little bit more progressed around a small reverse osmosis bucket package to do that, which is another exciting sciencey filled way to connect programming with. So know that that's out there and available. And they also run in conjunction the Tucker Mountain Challenge, which is open to schools. And also, if you're not in school, in our state, they offer it out to youth groups. So if like a 4-H group has been welcome to enter this challenge as well. But the challenge is to create I think they've gone down to a pint. It used to be a little bit bigger. It's either a pint or a quart of syrup, but I think it's down to a pint of syrup, and put it into the challenge. And it's judged based on color, clarity, taste. And the top prize, I think, is either $1,000 or $750 back to the winning group. Like it's reasonable to do. Like it's worth doing. And then the next 2 prizes down is still reasonable too. And the idea is that you could put that back into equipment for you after. So something definitely worth looking into. The New Hampshire Maples Producers Association. And of course, there's other states have other associations too, like Maine and such too. But I mentioned New Hampshire's just because New Hampshire based. But they have educational resources on their website, as well as just contacting them. I will talk about this a little bit too, but if you can connect, and I know a couple of you mentioned taking field trips, if you can connect with a local sugar maker to make that experience even that more real for youth, fantastic. And so I know our New Hampshire maple producers here are amazing. They're a great group of people. And so that's a great way to find out who are your local producers if you don't know already in your area, and just reaching out to them in general. The president, I can tell you, I reached out with a project idea and he was wonderful as far as reaching back. And I mentioned New York maple producers on here, just particularly because they are a resource that I go to often too. They have a nice set of educational resources too that is different from New Hampshire's agriculture in the classrooms as far as lessons and activities around maple sugaring for youth. So they have they've done some real nice work with there. So I do pull from them. And I should put on here, like, as far as if you wanted technical information and stuff to UVM and their research center, Maple Research Center, is amazing if you want, you're needing for that technical expertise and such. So a lot of our research can be right out here in the Northeast in Vermont. And I didn't put that on and I should have, and I'll probably go back and add that. And I didn't start, and I should have started this too. So I do maple sugaring for my work, but it is also a personal passion of mine. So just, I, aside of doing this with youth, on the backside, I do run a small sugaring operation with my family, about 400 taps here in New Hampshire, in central New Hampshire. It's We've been operating that operation for about 18 years now. And prior to that, my mother grew up in a sugar house. So it's been in the family for quite some time. So that's kind of where my passion comes from for this, what I think is a wonderful, wonderful adventure. Okay. So jumping into the nits and grits of this, okay? So tips and everything. So I kind of wanted to share we're gonna take the assumption that you're gonna take the plunge and you're gonna jump in and you're gonna do this with youth. And so great. Where do you start? How do you do it? And kind of some of the things, talking through some of the things to think through, what might work for you, what I've seen work or not work, happy to share. And I would love others to share. I know a few of you have done some sugaring activities or operations with youth. So please share, whether in the chat. I think Stacy said not to chime in, but I wouldn't mind you chiming in either. If that works for you, whatever way you're happy with sharing. But I think important to think about is when to start. So this has been a conversation. And I mean like during the season versus before the season versus year round. So there's a lot that you can cover, a lot of topics that can be covered through the maple tree. If we just talk about the tree itself and thinking about all the biology and that happens in there, and if we talk about the rest of the forest and how a forest works together and forest health and such, that happens there. And so the season itself can be very, very busy. Depending on, and it's, again, we're at the mercy of the weather, right? So if we get those week to 2 weeks of 32-degree nights with 40-degree days, we're going to have some good runs and we're going to be super busy during that time. And then are you prepared to be during that time also still treating tree ID, forest health, maple mechanics, and we'll talk about what those all mean in a second, or what I mean by when I say them and possibilities for you, while you're trying to gather sap and think about boiling it out. Or do you have the option of starting this project before the season starts? So I will share with you, 2 years ago, I had a group of 4th and 5th graders right down the road here from me that I was doing this project with, and we started right in the mid of season, like season first of all sprung on us. We should have been tapping, and we're starting to learn about tree ID and what a maple tree is. And so we're trying to catch up and tap at the same time and get through it. And we got through it, we did, but it felt rushed. And so when we came back at it the next year, last year, what we said when we worked with our incorporating educators is we started 2 months early. So we actually, right after Christmas break, holiday break, we came into the classrooms and we started working with those students. And so we front loaded everything. We learned about the topics or sequences, the topics that are listed out there that I'll talk a little bit more about in detail beforehand. And then when it got time to the season for time to start tapping and actually having the sap run, that's what we were focused on. We were focused on tapping the trees, collecting the sap, and we were doing some data collection with them around sap content, sugar content, sap volume, and tracking all of that, as well as weather data too. And then collecting enough so that we can boil out, which made it feel for us, and I think for the youth, a lot less rushed and allowed for more student inquiry, and they could really question, and figure out what they wanted to know about and allow that time for exploration and have questions come up and allow them the time to explore through that. I say year round too. There's a lot that can be learned and a lot of things that we can look at around the maple tree itself or trees in general that could happen in September when we're looking at fall leaves changing color and pigmentation and how that process works and stuff, depending on what you're looking to tie it to as far as learning content, all the way through even to after season. So depends on going back to what your goals are for the project and what your time allowance is. But I think particularly thinking about especially how much content maple sugaring content do you want to be delivering during season, or can you front load some of it? I think would be my recommendation or my experiences. And if anybody else has any experience about when they try to teach or not teach or how that works, and I will share with you that I have done maple sugaring with students in the middle of July in downtown Manchester. And so there are ways to make a maple sugaring experience happen when you can make it happen, right? And so that was the time when I had the chance to have that audience, and that was the topic, that the chosen topic. It was I have a pollinator topic that I could have gone in with, but the organizers wanted me to come in with maple, so I came in with maple. Okay, and lo and behold, I was doing tree diameter and wanted to measure trees, and talking to them about the organizers and wanting to have a facility where I could measure trees, and they didn't know if they said we have a few trees, but we don't know. And I showed up, and I'm standing in the center of 6 beautiful maple trees. I was like, oh, you do not know what resource you have here. Oh my goodness. But they were beautiful. So anyways, but you can do maple anytime. We tapped trees. We didn't tap the actual tree, but we had a stump. We tapped it. So they had that experience of tapping in the middle of July. Paul, I see your question. I'm going to save it for a second. Let me get it down when we get to topics. Okay. We'll get there. Dosage too. And thinking about that, what works for your program. So everybody, I think it's probably going to be a little bit different in where you're coming from. And I can't tell you that I think I've actually come to the sweet spot with the classrooms that I'm working with right now. Right now, we have traditionally done it as a 6-week series with them as far as the learning part. And I'll talk just about the learning part, not the actual boiling part, but the learning about the trees, the forest health, all of that part as a 6-week experience, once a week for 1 hour for 6 weeks. I know of some schools down in the southern part of the state. The high school students do it for like a month-long experience, doing that out. But at the elementary levels, they do it as a day-long experience. One day, they learn it all. That is intensive. But that's what their schedule allows for, right? So that's what they do. So it depends. So thinking about what your schedule looks like, what you can allow, what your students' attention spans or youth attention spans will allow. Thinking about that. I think there's benefits and drawbacks to all of it. So I'm not sure that there's one right answer on it. And if anybody has, this really works super well. We did it exactly like this and it worked. It was perfect. Great. And whether that works in every environment, I don't know. But thinking about that. So what I find with myself, because I'm going as an outsider into a classroom when I'm supporting classroom enrichment, depending on how that it's kind of it's the 1 hour time slot is kind of where we're at. So that's how we work that. Sequence and topics. And this one we'll get to the chief's question about this. So I laid out these 4 topics kind of as a base. And so with the caveat that you can get as detailed or less detailed as you want, or in depth from these topics as you would like. So this is kind of what I call my base package that I would like to go in when I am working with youth. This is kind of like the base of what I would like them to know when I leave a program about, if they're going to know about maple sugaring, the process and what they would need to know about. And so when I start with either a youth in the 4-H program, when we're starting with our volunteers, and actually in a couple of weeks, I'm doing part 2 of a volunteer training, or when I'm in a school working with youth that way, we start with the tree. Because if you think about the maple sugaring process as it goes, it all centers around this maple tree. And I tell the students, you can't start maple sugaring if you don't know that you have a maple tree. So we start with tree ID. So I don't know. I'm not sure how well everybody else does tree ID, what your comfort level is. It's not my strength. I will say that. It's not my strength. So doing it in the middle of winter is hard for me. But we work through it. I prefer to go out and do it in the fall time. And I encourage classes to do that, or teachers to do that, or my volunteers to do that. But we start with the tree. We start with knowing what the tree, and then we go into the health of the forest and the tree measurements. And so I think the question was, what is the earliest age of a tree that a tree can be tapped? And so we don't actually, it's not based on the age, but rather on the size. So it is correlated a little bit with the age, but with the size. And so we do tree measurements. And we're measuring diameter of the tree. And so we don't want to tap a tree that's under 10 inches in diameter. So that's our baseline. And when we're doing 10 to 18 inches of a tree diameter, we're doing one tap. And 18 to the upper one, I'm going to say 36, but don't quote me on that upper number. I have to usually resort to my manual and stuff. We're doing 2 taps in that size. So there's a range for a number of taps we're doing. But does that size equate to the age of the tree? For sure. Because, each year the tree is putting on a ring and it's getting wider, and that's where we're getting our diameter out of. But we don't measure it in the age of the tree. We measure it in the diameter of that tree. Which then is a fun, if anybody's on here from math, it's fun because I have some systems where we measure circumference. So we do a little conversion, or we're doing diameter. We're talking about the difference of diameter and circumference. Or we can do some angles there too, with a little geometry to do measurements. So fun stuff there. So we're talking about health. Actually have a fun activity where they role play trees, and somebody gets to be the timber, the forester, and gets to decide which trees get cut down and stuff too. And it's always hard to have that conversation as to why you would cut down a young, healthy maple tree in a forest. But sometimes you might, for the health of the forest, depending if there's overcrowding going on. So we talk about those kind of things. And then moving on to what I call maple mechanics, or how the tree works. And so that's where we get into kind of those, the actual insides of the tree. And so the layers of the tree, and the different types of cells, and what the different cell functions are, and doing some actual modeling of those cells. You can do a lot with a toilet paper tube and some straws and some old wrinkly paper and some construction paper and stuff to build out models, so that they have some hand-on tactile pieces with that. And I have little cookie chunks, tree cookies for them to look at with a little hand microscope. And then we're not talking big money for these kind of things. Like for the actual equipment that I'm using, Amazon for a packet of 10 hand lenses is maybe $10 or so. Like, it's not super lots of money to have a little bit of fun with and to get some good exploration with. And then we start to get into a little bit more of that actual maple sugar stuff, and the density, and how we measure density, and some of those tools that we're utilizing that they're going to need to know about when we're actually boiling. So if we know we have the right tree, we know we have the right size of that tree. In that mix there, we've talked about tapping, how to tap. I always have an old stump, and we practice tapping. I always practice tapping an old stump before I get to the tree. It is, to me, to get out. We do hand drills, a drill here, a power drill. And so it's not very forgiving. And so to really have them understand that in and out in the power, and not letting go, not letting off the actual trigger when you come out, because you want it to pull up the sawdust and the angle to go in and stuff. That's a lot of pressure when you're actually at a tree that you want to tap and have a good tap, and not have the tap actually fall out of that. So we practice. And that's what we use the old stump for. And so then once you know tapping that, and then you understand how the tree works and why it's giving us the sap that it's giving us. And then we talk about, okay, once it gives us a sap, these are the things that we're going to need to know about to make good maple syrup. We're going to need to know how to measure density, and why do we measure density, and what does density mean? How can we determine how much maple syrup we're going to need to boil off as much sap much syrup as we want? So we talk about the Jones's rule of 86. Everybody knows that one and stuff too, but if you know the sugar content of your sap, then you can determine how much sap you're going to need to make a gallon of syrup. So that's it. That's where you've heard 40-1, the ratio. That's where that comes from on the averages. That's what that's referring to. So that's a lot. Whew, that's a lot of talking. And then boiling. So you may very well do maple sugaring with kids and not actually boil. I understand that. It depends on what your resources are, where you are, your time frame and stuff too. But if you can boil, absolutely boil. I said I did maple syrup in the middle of July down in Manchester. So we can actually make maple syrup in the middle of July. It seems very counterintuitive, but if you take maple syrup that you made and you pour some water in it, you bring it back down, because that's what we do when we boil, right? We're taking something that's higher percent water, less percent sugar. We're boiling that water out, bringing it down, concentrating it more, right? So I just reversed the process. When we boil it back up, seems a little counterintuitive, but you can do it, and you can make syrup again, so that they have the experience in the process and being able to actually utilize hydrometers with in actually measuring product. So that's why I would do that. But with boiling, and I think this is in my next, it's in my next slide. We'll talk about that. So with actual boiling stuff, the safety of youth, things to think about that you may or may not think about, the safety of youth. Certainly we're working with hot material here, working with power drills, those kind of things. So always having safety in mind. And I will tell you that I do this with really young kids. I do maple sugaring with the clover buds, the 5 to 7 year olds. We do maple sugaring with really young groups. And we're very cognizant and intentional about how we do that, and how, the adults to youth ratio when we do that, closeness to fire, clothing, all of those are safety things. So just really thinking through that, because you are dealing with that hot fire kind of thing. We don't want any accidents happening. And I will tell you, and this, I'll skip food safety for a minute, but then go, am I comfortable leading outdoor activities? And I think that in safety of youth, they kind of go together. I will tell you, I was with 2 teachers, and I didn't know them very well, but I read the facial expressions when I took their students out into the woods, and I paired them up and I said, okay, go to your trees. And there was a little bit of fear in their faces. But I also gave some other parameters, and I had been out and I had done some pre-work. I had marked trees, and there was snow lines that they couldn't go past and stuff too. So we did that. But for those teachers, not having been in outdoor environments before, it wasn't a very comfortable situation. They got to trust me and know that those students were okay and that we got through that. But just knowing where your comfort level is and preparing for that, to being in outdoor activities, I think is important. And not everybody is, you think about it, it's an outdoor activity, but what resources or what might you need to help support you in doing that? Food safety. So we are dealing with food. So this particularly comes important when we get to that boiling stage, and we're filtering sap, we're filtering the syrup, then we're bottling it, and we're bottling it at the correct density. So syrup being at 66 to 68.9% sugar to be legally labeled as syrup. And if you don't do that, what happens if you're too low, then we go rancid, and we have a food safety issue there. And if we go too high, then we have crystallization happening, which isn't not as toxic, and you can that back out. But so just thinking about that food safety and handling of that, cleaning of jugs, all of those kind of things, and how you're going to store that. Storage of equipment. So if you have buckets and stuff too, where are you going to keep those during the off season? Evaporated. So talking about the boiling equipment, so you can do maple sugaring. Yeah, they're great big fancy evaporators. You can do them on a small pot. I will say, if you're doing it in a space that has wallpaper, that's probably not the best, because you're boiling off water unless you want your wallpaper stripped. So thinking about that. But you don't need a bunch of fancy equipment to do it. I mean, a lot of turkey fryer situations are set up and stuff too. I think one of my original pictures in one of the other slides was a barrel evaporator. I have a volunteer leader who made it out of a 2-drawer file cabinet. They made a homemade one. So I actually have a book in my office of they went around to New Hampshire backward backyard maple sugars and how they had made them. And it's like some had them in stone walls built in and stuff too. It's really cool. I should when I send out the follow-up email, I'll try to find that title for you because it's just a really nice, cool read. So but the equipment and like the hydrometers and stuff, how you're going to store that in the off season, because there is some equipment associated with that. And then to think about extensions and interdisciplinary opportunities. So there's an opportunity here to really extend your learning and to interdisciplinary. So I think of it's not just maple sugaring. There are some great literary connections. You know, if you're, I think when I talk to my educators in the classroom, if you're the science teacher coming to me, great. Let's talk about how we can talk to the math teacher down the hall and do a connected project here. Or how can we talk to that language arts teacher down the hall? And how can we bring in the other areas or other subjects or team members into this to make it a really well-rounded kind of a project? And there's opportunity that. And I had two pictures up here of forestry and just thinking about that general larger concept of forestry and what that could mean just to the maple sugaring project that you're doing with your youth. Can you freeze concentrate the sap? Can you freeze the concentrate before boiling it down to speed up the boiling process? So I had a wonderful experience. Well, I won't say wonderful experience with this past year. You can freeze concentrated sap to hold it over because fresh is best, right? To it, and sap it's a perishable. It is perishable. So if you are in a situation, and this is what happened to us this past year, we were working with 4 classrooms actually, and working on the school schedule more than the maple sugaring schedule, and so scheduling out a boiling date around that. And the season ended before we got there. And so then we needed sap. And so we concentrated down a bunch of sap, and I cleaned out my upright freezer and froze a bunch of sap, concentrated sap, and held it over. So if you can store it, you can do that. My thought is, though, the way you have it worded, if you're thinking, you can unmute yourself. Are you thinking to freeze it so you can get the ice to the top and just have the sap in the bottom?
Yeah, I'm thinking of like cryo concentrating it so that it decreases the length of the boil time. Yeah.
So it's actually a controversial topic. It depends on what sugar you talk to, because some will say that you actually are throwing out some sugar in that frozen ice at the top. And see Leslie, she's in the other. I can see her shaking no. She's depending on it. So I did a small little like experiment here at the house this past season with ours and the buckets that we did. And I wasn't getting enough of a difference for me to say that I would go through that process of trying to freeze it out to save me the time. It was taking up more of my resource to get it frozen out, and taking it at that time I had to, at that point, because our season was so quick and it was at the end, to freeze it out in the freezer to do it.
Got it. Thank you.
But if you can run it through RO, you should theoretically speed up your time because you are concentrating out and taking out water. And a small bucket system, I think, runs right around $350 or so for a small system. So this is just the resource I got to go back again, that there are resources out there. There's a lot to maple sugaring. You don't have to go it alone. So I just put these back up there. And again, this will be in the follow-up that goes back out to you. Yeah. Questions? Oh, there's the picture of that barrel evaporator that we did with the youth, actually in my own yard the first year. It was not very efficient, but it did work. Sure. Makes a tiny difference. So that's questions. I'm going to stop sharing screen so I can actually see faces. I don't know if I missed any questions in the chat. I tried to watch as I went. Tom, I will get that that name of that book. And I do have a couple other resources too in the office that I'll add onto the resource list before it goes out to you guys. I'm just catching up in the chat myself. I like, and Tom, some great shares and stuff too, that interdisciplinary with the history, the biology, marketing, food science, and the designing the label. Nice.
Would anyone like to share about what they are doing? I mean, maple syrup season is some places it started already and other places it's coming up. What plans do you have?
I had a producer in my office today and he started tapping last week, but he's in Southwest Virginia and the weather's been so warm, he's been able to do that. I anticipate that the sap will stop flowing soon because we're going to get more cold weather, I'm sure.
Kelly, can you remind me of where you are?
Hi, yes, I'm so sorry my camera won't come
you're
on.
Keene. You're Keene.
I'm in Keene. Yep.
Yeah.
And new to all of this, we usually have some people that come out to our preschool. We have an early childhood center who have donated a tap and drilled them and tapped the trees. And the extent of our maple sugaring experience has been to drink the tree water, which is so delicious. And we all love it so much. But this year, don't have those families in tow. So that's why I was really excited about this, because it'll be my first year trying to, I know which trees are our maple trees, thankfully, and they're very large in diameter. I can reach my arms around them. So just even getting 2 taps in just a bucket. I know somebody had some, then they were concerned that they were old, that maybe there was lead in the buckets, et cetera, et cetera. So just real newbie here, wondering, and a lot of times, they have seed starting libraries. I didn't know if they had any tap and bucket libraries.
So New Hampshire Ag in the Classroom does run the equipment grant. So that'll be something you would want to check out. So they've closed this year's, but for next year, it would be.
What is it called?
New Hampshire Ag in the Classroom. So when we send out the slides, there is a link in there for you for that.
Okay.
Start you off with 10 buckets, 10 lids and that and stuff too.
Wow.
But if you're looking for stuff for this year, and I don't have any buckets left and stuff too, but we can certainly talk to your local 4-H office. I have some kits here in New Hampshire. I know I have one kit already going out, but I have another substantial kit that can maybe beg, borrow, and kind of make it work for you.
Oh, thank you. Okay, great. So I should just get in touch with you perhaps after the Zoom call another time. Okay, thank you so much.
Thanks, Stacy, for that.
I wanted to follow up on Cindy's question. She asked thoughts and suggestions on best ways to forge partnerships with sugar maples. And we heard talk about visiting sugar maples makers earlier. Does anybody have any suggestions there? I think that's very important.
I think your Maple Producers Association is a great contact for them, because at least here in New Hampshire, most of your sugar houses belong to that. Also your extension office, a lot of them, they're connected. I know I could go down and talk to Tim, our forester, and he is visiting maple sugar houses all the time. And if you're from around here, I'm happy to talk to you and figure out what sugar house is in your area. It might be a good connection, because we've been doing some 4-H programs with sugar houses in the area. So we know that we have some that are already operating with youth and have that mindset. If anybody's up in the Tamworth area, I don't think anybody's on stuff too, but Remnick Farm has a great sugar house that's set up for learning up there already. So that there's some good resources right around here. I don't know. And I don't know. In New Hampshire, we do a maple more like a maple month now than a weekend, which is a great time to go out and visit sugar houses and get to know your local maple sugarers. And I don't know if Indiana or some of the other states that are on here, Connecticut and such too, if your states are doing stuff like that to promote maple sugaring, but that's another great way to get to know people in the area. And that's a informal way to get into a sugar house, see how it's set up and kind of get a feel for it. And if it's somebody that might work well with you in your youth.
West Virginia has Maple Days, 2 Saturdays, one in February and one in March.
Yes.
Virginia has 2 maple syrup festivals. Actually, there's more, but 2 that I know of, one in mid-March and one in late March.
Nice.
And Maine has a Maple Day, a Maple Weekend. I'm not sure when it is. I think it's end of March.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, Michelle. I have a note here that you mentioned that you can add water to finished syrup. I am very interested in learning about how to speed up the process for when I go in to also provide enrichment in schools. We can't spend the whole day boiling down tree sap.
Yeah,
Do you have a resource that you could point us to, or can you speak more about that?
to speed the process up.
Yes.
Are you doing an RO process before you get there with the sap?
No, so I did make a note of that too.
Okay, that would be a start for
Okay.
sure. And then the other thing that I've done, and it's a little bit labor intensive and stuff on your part, is to start the boiling process prior to getting there.
Okay.
So I have taken some partial boiled. I'll take it, RO it, and then I'll boil it part of the way. And it's a little bit of a guess game to, depending upon what your boiling environment is and such. We try to do the schools and we do them outside, and it always seems to be windy, so my boil is affected.
Yeah.
But I try to boil it to where I know that I'm gonna get to a finished product within the time frame. I got enough, it concentrated enough that I'm gonna be able to get it at that point. So that's the only.
Okay.
Yeah. There's no real you could just add this to it and do that. But yeah, you gotta just get that water out of it. And yeah.
I will just share with the group that I was brand new to this last year, and I was able to use all of the resources that were shared with me and kind of put together a program just based on the knowledge that I learned last year. And I said in the chat that we just donated our sap to a local sugar maker. And then we just kind of put together some information and shared with the kids about what the final process looks like. And the kids loved it. So wherever you're at, you can teach kids.
And that's a good point too, Jess. And I've done this with schools too before. If you are time sensitive for the freshness, I've worked with local sugar makers to take the sap as it's being collected from a school, and on their day of boil, bring them a fresh batch, because so that they have fresh stuff to boil and we're not worried about the holdover part.
Okay.
So that might be an option too for people looking for fresh stuff.
Thank you for doing this.
You're welcome. Leslie?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, so we have some other local sugar makers that we will do exchanges with, so that we have something on hand that we know is going to turn into syrup at the right moment, at the right time for a field trip. So we might exchange with them, a 5-gallon bucket of actual maple syrup, and they'll give us back, 10 gallons of almost syrup that we can toss into our evaporator that's going to work for our field trip. So since you were already exchanging or donating sap to a sugar maker last year, maybe you could work out an exchange program to kind of magically speed up the process. Hey, we'll give you our sap if you give us back some almost syrup.
That's a great idea. Thanks for sharing that.
I had a question for Leslie. In your chat message, you said you sugar about 10 gallons using the traditional Miami wood troughs. Could you describe that for us?
Sure. So after our season, we keep back about 10 gallons of our really dark, robust. You want it to be as black as you can get it. And I have partnered with the local Miami, and they have taught me, and they participate. We all come out. It's actually a really fun day. We have a cast iron kettle that will boil the maple syrup over an open fire. We boil it far beyond syrup. I couldn't tell you the degree because I learned how to do it by like sensory, the appearance of it, the texture of it, the sound of it. But I know you can find the actual degree if you would like to use a candy thermometer of when it goes from syrup to sugar. And then we pour it into a traditional wooden trough that ours were carved from basswood. It really just looks like a very tiny, maybe 2 foot long bathtub, if you can imagine that, but just a very long wooden bowl. And once you pour the syrup in, you immediately start moving it around with a wooden spoon back and forth and circulating that air into it. It goes through kind of a sticky peanut butter stage, and then it will eventually granulate. And you just keep pushing it around and around and around until you get it as actual sugar granules. It's delicious and amazing, and it's really cool, especially for kids, to see that extra step in the process of boiling and going from a liquid into a solid. And then, of course, you can dissolve the sugar back into a liquid. So it's a neat science experiment. I will say that we don't have very good luck with RO syrup. For whatever reason, it will not sugar. So it's got to be the good old fashioned, you stood there and watched it boil for hours and hours sugar. So hopefully that answers your question.
It does. Thank you very much. That's fascinating. And how much of the liquid is lost in the log, in the carved out log? Is a fair amount of it?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I feel like, so when we boil it down, you basically are taking it to where there is no moisture left. There's really no steam coming up out of that kettle. And if you were to push it even further, you can burn it to an absolute crisp in a heartbeat. So I don't feel like we lose a whole lot, but some is lost. I've never actually measured it before. I know everybody goes home with a nice big gallon bag of sugar, so we can't be losing too much.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you for everything. I'm sorry I had to step out there for a minute. The boss was on the line, so I had to take it.
Of course. No problem.
Are we in question and answer right now, or open to questions? Is that okay? I did have one quick question. I'm an assistant principal down here in Hampstead, and we are, for the first time, in terms of what I know here, teaching about sugaring to our third graders. Oh, sorry. Okay, thank you. Okay, sorry. I was busy. We're teaching our third graders for the first time about sugaring, and we're hoping actually to go to our high school, which is Pinkerton Academy, to visit their sugar shack and get a live demonstration, et cetera, so that the kids can see the process as it's done. So what I was particularly interested in is maybe taking a look at some of these resources that you're mentioning, particularly around curriculum and what I would say multidisciplinary curriculum, incorporating the math, the weather, the science, measurement, climate, environment, etc. So those are some things that I'm personally looking for. And then also just the general knowledge, because I enjoy doing some backyard sugaring when I have the very limited time that I have. So.
Nice. That's exciting, Peter, and happy as you go along that journey and stuff too, to come and talk to you and any of the teachers and stuff too, as they're trying to incorporate that into the classrooms. We'd be happy to support in any way that we can.
Yeah, no, thank you. I appreciate that. I might be reaching out as we get closer. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Any final questions? I got a few minutes left. All right. So thank you all for joining us this afternoon. As Michelle said, we will be sending out the resources that she presented in the PowerPoint, as well as some of the others that we have talked about, to all of you that came and all of the ones that have registered. Again, this webinar is being recorded and will be available for future viewing and found on the New Hampshire farmtoschool.org website. So we have another webinar coming up on January 30th around basic classroom hydroponics. And Michelle's doing that one again, and she has a co-presenter with her for that one. So if you want to register for that, we'll send out the link again for that. And otherwise, thank you for joining us all this afternoon.
Thank you, everyone, and happy sugaring.